maybe something for our panelists, because we are conscious of time and we are very intentional to have an engaging discussion. It is very important, dear panelists, for us to be brief, because brevity is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Please aim to keep your insights sharp and concise. Think of it as an intellectual speed dating. This is going to help us to save time for what we all love most, a lively, engaging conversation with the audience. We promise, if you shine in 5 minutes, we'll remember you forever. So thank you for keeping it tight, timely, and terrific. So without much ado, we are going to get into a very critical discussion, and I have the singular pleasure to invite somebody who has been in the space where we are talking about research and development in the continent, changing positions from a researcher to somebody that is very engaged when it comes to science leadership, and I'm talking about Evelyn. So Evelyn, we are going to start this discussion. So what policy incentives or blended finance approaches could encourage greater private sector participation in funding African research and development? Thank you.
Wow, we start with the hardest one first, right? So, I mean, all day we've been hearing a lot about, this morning Kede said something about doing less with, doing more with less. And I was like, no, we need to have more. And just now we've heard from the speakers before, they told us that actually a lot more for Africa is spent outside of Africa. So we know that's the status quo. So there is enough for African research. It's just not being spent in Africa. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. So as the Science for Africa Foundation, there are a couple of things that we have been trying to do, and now more than ever is really important for us to think about how we can scale up or how we can capitalize on the things we've been doing. We focus our work in terms of impact, looking at the 5 impact areas, or what we call the 5 Ps. So for human capital development, we focus on people. And we've been running programs across the continent, trying to provide fellowships that would hopefully develop the types of research leaders that we've been seeing in the room this week. You know, Yao is a recipient of some of the things that we have funded over the years. And he's a leader who is challenging the status quo and saying that we need to do better, we can do better. He has started a company that hopefully in 10 years, as he said this morning, will be funding the Science for Africa Foundation. But we need to think about the type of funding that would allow him, or the type of innovative ways of raising capital that would allow his company to develop. So the focus on people is the first thing that we've been doing through fellowships, through partnerships with funders, you know, Welcome, Gates, etc. The second thing is places. So all these people we've been interacting with this week keep coming back with the point that the ecosystem does not support them to stay. So we've been working very hard to support institutions to grow. We've just heard about the National Public Health Institutes. We have a grant for pandemic science that we're about to announce. We're really excited. But one of the things this week that you may have seen is fellows who have been positioned to sit in these national public health institutions. We need to work stronger and better with national public health institutions so that those of us who are the privileged working in the Kemri Welcomes, in the ILRIs, can actually grow those public health institutions. So at SFA, we believe in the hub and spoke model, where we support hubs, strong institutions like Kemri Welcome, to hopefully train other not so strong institutions that in 5 years, they will have transferred the capabilities that they have to become stronger institutions. And we think that multiplier effect will start making changes across the continent. The third P is products, products, products. This is, of course, something that I care about. I was there at the start of Grand Challenges Africa 10 years ago. We worked to conceptualize it with Cadest, with Tom, and many in the room, with no idea of how we can fund innovation on the continent. Because 10 years ago, you may think things are bad now. 10 years ago, very little was being thought about. it came about for me from a personal perspective, where I was given a grant, or was to get a grant from GSK. And they came and did, yes, from the privileged Kemri, welcome. They came and did due diligence. So I had a lovely shiny mass spec in Kilifi, and I was excited because I think I was one of 5 mass specs on the continent. And they actually decided not to give me the money because they said I am a one-man show, one-lady show. And they took it away. It was very painful. So for me, it was like, how is innovation going to happen if no one has the interest to take a risk on us as Africans? So I moved because of that. So that's the third P, products, and innovation. It's really something that we've been supporting through grand challenges, and we have many innovations that we can show. The fourth one is policies. That's what we've been talking about this week. Ecosystems can only develop if we actually put in right policies to support the ecosystem. So we've been working around good grants, good financial grants management. Research management is something we talk about, open research, and things like that, and hopefully that will change the ecosystem. And the last P is partnerships. You know, the African proverb has been said over and over again. We cannot do this alone. We cannot do it without our partnerships in the North, because we need to encourage them to change their mindset. So we work closely with the big funders, yes, and I think we're getting somewhere in changing their mindsets. Although, as I said, when Kadest, and it's unfortunate she's not in the room, I really wanted her to challenge her when she said, we need to do more with less. I'm like, no, we just need to take the risk and give more. So I can talk a little bit about blended financing, but one of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of scaling up some of these things is, how do you de-risk what venture capitalists think about? How do you de-risk investments for governments? Because that's the other thing that is a big problem. And so we're thinking about outcome bonds, for example, that governments could think about, where if Wellcome has funded something up to a point that it has a discovery, then what can the government do to scale it up, but then de-risk maybe venture capitalists you know, not being able to get the return on investment. So if you bring a private sector partnership, a philanthropic partnership, and a government partnership in a type of innovation bond that will allow for that, I think there are ways that that would then help allow for everyone to come out happy. And government bonds, I mean, many of us invest in them. You know, that's the security we need in this space, so we need to start thinking about this type of blended financing. Thank you.
No, thanks so much, Evelyn, and I like the point you ended with when it comes to partnerships. And Anthony, you're looking at me, you're going to get a very hard question, I can promise you. Because partnerships, yes, win-win partnerships, yes, everybody says we need to involve the private sector, public-private partnerships. What is a private partnership? Everybody says we need to be intentional in generating funding or rendering research enviable from our public partners or local philanthropy. And Anthony, I know you're very good on time. In 2 minutes, can you tell us concretely what it means by coming up with win-win public-private partnerships, or focusing on local philanthropy? How can this actually contribute when we look at what is happening in the geopolitical space with landslide reductions in funding? Thank you.
Am I allowed not to answer? I can skip, right? I can't give a pass. Well, it's a very difficult question, and I think private-public partnership, people have been talking about it for many years, right? But in the context of research in the continent, what is it that we are putting in? To what extent the relationship is balanced? I think that's what I'm trying to also understand, because in most cases, we hear PPPs, but they're just theoretically PPPs. In actual sense, they're not PPPs, right? It can't be PPPs if one P is offering more than the other P, okay? You'd imagine it that way. But I think the gist of your question, Lucho, is also trying to think what roles Africans have to play in funding their own development, in funding their own research, their own science, technology, and innovation. I think that's the gist of the question, right? There are many ways to think about this. Many ways to think about this. One, do we value research? Because we invest in things that we value. Would you invest in something that you don't value? If we value research, then definitely investing is important. And let me start off from the micro level. Africans, what do we do individually? Evelyn, you and me, Jordan, my panelist, what do we do individually? Are we doing enough? Start from there. And then if we scale up the ladder to the philanthropists in the continent, the Mayisiwa, the Dangotes, how much they put in. But for them to do that, to the point that Evelyn raised, what are the incentives? What do they get back in return? Because they are not in the business of giving, they're in the business of making money. They want to be able to invest for that money to come back. And that goes to us as individual investors at the community, at the family level. When we put in, what do we get back? We might not necessarily derive money, but that public good, that impact to the society is something that we would wish to see. Now, in the context of public-private partnership, what roles do government play? Do you even have voice? What leverage do governments have to be able to steer conversation in the right directions? I'll give an example. Evelyn, you talked about bonds. In African countries, we even hear Ruto bond. Very soon we'll hear that. In Tanzania, we have Samia bond. You have diaspora bond. You have infrastructure bond. Have you ever heard of science, technology, and innovation bond? In China in 2024, they issued a 10 years bond, Sci-Tech Innovation Bond, to mobilize local resources that are needed to support and finance science, technology, and innovation in their country. See where they are now. Trump is sweating. I'm sorry, American in the audience. It's a fact. Unless we make intentional efforts to invest in what belongs to us, that impact is imaginary. It's just a dream, it's a facade. So yes, philanthropies, charity begins at home. If we are buying bonds, government bonds, Evelyn, we all run for 25 years, 30 years, because we are thinking of our families in 25 years from now, I'll be retiree, but the coupon will be coming in. But what if we do the same for science and technology? How far will we go? And that money is actually locally derived money. How much further can we progress as a continent? So yes, in terms of philanthropy, in terms of thinking about the triple P, I think it's not about the institutional, the macro level sort of engagement. It trickles down to even how we think as Africans. We want partnership, but what kind of partnership are we opening up ourselves to? Now I can skip Luto, right? Yes, let me stop there.
Before you clap for Anthony, he's still in the hot seat.
Okay.
So, Anthony, you're Director of Programs, Synergy at APHRC. And I want us to talk about issues regarding, funding models that are African-led, African-led pooled financing mechanisms. We are witnessing these financing models on the continent, really to mobilize resources, mobilize and manage resources to help the continent address specific challenges. And that way, they kind of, create some level of ownership on the continent as well as impact. I would like you to tell us what opportunities really exist to design African-led financing mechanisms or regional STI investment platforms
And we have some of these examples
Okay.
seated on this panel.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Evelyn, first of all, can I comment on our evaluation when you're doing a performance evaluation? Because I know I'll deal with Lucho. I'm just kidding. So, what are the African-led financing models? That's the question you're asking. So, I want to focus on one new innovation that is, I don't know whether people are already familiar with. It's called Global Public Investments, GPI. And if you can Google GPIN, the network, I'm somehow connected. And I was involved a couple of years ago in socializing GPI in African countries, in 6 African countries: Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Namibia. And I had an opportunity to speak to parliamentarians about what is GPI. GPI is, and allow me to, for a minute to just give a little bit of context, is a pushback by African countries because the current global financial architecture is very punitive and it's unfavorable for many African countries. So GPI, Global Public Investment, was initiated as an alternative thinking around how can we create a system that is balanced. It has 3 principles: all countries contribute, all countries decide, and all countries benefit. You can Google. Now, in the course of working through GPI, I coined what I call regional public investments. And you'll be shocked, by the way, these are mechanisms that have been established. African governments are contributing, and we say we don't have money. Global Environmental Facility, if you Google right now, you will see African countries that are contributing in the Global Environmental Facility. Where do they get money from? African Union Peace Fund, African countries are contributing. COVAX, they are contributing. Global Fund, they are contributing. I can name the list. That goes to say, even in science and technology, African-led initiatives can actually be done. 2 years ago, I was in Cote d'Ivoire with African Development Bank education team. And they were starting an initiative where the bank could fund African governments from their own resources, and they needed $5 million to set up that fund. They had gotten $2 million from Zambia, $2 million from Botswana. I'm not sure whether the fund has kicked off. And the idea there is that countries can go and borrow concessional loans which have very low interest rates. When we think of STI, our governments, if make such decisions, they can pool resources because AU fund is already fund supported. As I said, Global Environmental Facility is already supported, and some countries go to borrow, the same African countries, right? So what I'm trying to say, African-led initiative, GPI for me is one of the very innovative approach in terms of how African countries can start galvanizing themselves to mobilize resources they need to support STI in the continent. Put a fund, of course there are politics involved, there are a lot of challenges. Navigate around those because those things are already happening. Why not now? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to go to Dr. Sultani. Doctor, we've been here for this is the 3rd day, and there's been a lot of talk around domestic financing and how we're not getting to meet our commitments to funding R&D on the continent, the 1% commitment of GDP for respective countries. I would like you to talk to us about, some of these, how can we drive policy advocacy to respond to, budgeting processes of countries. We know that we have a lot of competing priorities, election cycles, and all these things that happen in governments. So what bold strategies can the African research community in specific employ to influence national budget allocations towards meeting the commitments that were made to, to R&D in Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's a very important discussion or question. One of the things I keep on asking myself is, and I probably said this before, is why 1%? Why not 5%? Why not 10%? Because I'm looking at what we want to achieve as a continent and the role of research in enabling science, technology, innovation. You know, it is not possible for us to achieve such objectives if we are putting very little investment into research. But the other thing is that we have talked a lot about what we need to do, and you know, most of these discussions are just collections of what we've already talked about, what we know. And I think the main gap here is that we really need to now just put our money where our mouth is. That's just the missing link. I think we even know the strategies. Even just on this panel, I've already had a lot of my fellow panelists bringing out some of the very effective ways in which we can do this. But of course, as we speak about it, I must reiterate that one of the crippling problems we have in Africa is over-reliance on external funding. And I think we have to start by, you know, just cleansing ourselves out of that thing, because I keep on hearing it everywhere. It is disgusting. We cannot grow, we cannot advance if we think that we will get very critical resources towards research, towards science, towards technology, innovate. You know, we are in the 21st century, for God's sake. We want to get that from external sources. How are we going to develop? How are we going to do it? It's not possible, because those external sources, they have their own priorities. So we really need to undergo this paradigm shift and start thinking, because what we are doing now is not thinking. The money needs to come from our own domestic sources. Of course, we understand that our economies are fragile, and so we might not be able, you know, the competing interests are quite many, and prioritization usually falls negative towards research, science, technology, innovation, and that's where we need to focus. So, because I know that I have a very short time, let me say this. We need to start. Let's start from somewhere. At least let's put in something so that we can get going. Sometimes we are just impatient. Sometimes we want to see the results overnight, and that's where we fail. So that if we don't see these results overnight, we get disappointed and we give up. So we really need to start. We really need to start small, and then we plan. Number two, we need to plan. We need to have 100-year plans, 200-year plans. How are we going to get there? You know, we don't have to see the end product, but we can start. We can be the pioneers. We can set a plan which we know if we follow through, then we will be able to achieve our objective. I want to spend a little bit of time on number three, because I am a policymaker. I sit on the policy table and I see how we fail in mobilizing domestic resources, especially from government. Because I think my fellow panelists have talked about the importance of tapping into philanthropists, corporates, you know, all those, you know, all those private, the other P. But we also need to see a lot of resources coming in from the exchequer, you know, from the consolidated fund, being appropriated by parliament to go into research as an investment, as a national investment, as a very important driver for economic growth. So number one, we really have to start looking at the relevance of research to our local situations. Because many times we see institutions coming to stake claim to some of the resources. But when you look at the research that they are talking about conducting, it does not even ring a bell to people on the table. Because they are wondering, okay, so how is this one going to help us? You know, we really have to prioritize local issues so that we can be able to conduct research that is going to solve our local problems. Number two, why are we conducting this research? Is it so that we can make money as researchers, or so that we can solve problems, or what is it we are doing? So we really have to know what exactly we want to do so that we can create strong justification. But most importantly, and this is where we fail as scientists, we must bring out the business case for research. Because we come in and we start showing pictures when we are doing our budget policy statements. We come in with pictures of children who are very sick. And then we are saying, these children are suffering, they are dying. So what? So what? Yeah? So you want us to put in money so that you stop the suffering? Yes, we can see. In fact, people turn away. When you put very horrid pictures, they turn away. When you finish, then they ask, so you want us to put in money? How are we going to benefit as government? What are we going to get in return? If you cannot demonstrate a return on investment, that is the very basic that you need to be able to listen, you know, to get the government to listen for allocation. We are giving you want us to give you 1 shilling. How much are we going to get back? If your answer is 0.9, you're not going to get funded unless there's something really crazy that's happening. But if your answer is 1.1, then they will sit up and listen to you. So we need a very strong justification to be able to drive allocation of resources. I know that in the health sector sometimes it's not a business-like thing, but then you can also be able to demonstrate that if you give me 1 shilling, I want you to just go back to thinking about the 10 shillings you are losing to this public health problem, and you describe it properly, and you say, this 1 shilling, I'll help you to save 5 out of that 10 that you are losing. And the government can be able to see the business case, and we will start getting public funds towards research. But then the final point that I really want to bring out is there is a need for us to constantly leverage data, monitoring, evaluation, and advocacy, so that we continuously show what is it that is happening. You know, when we go out and conduct research, what is it doing? What are we getting out of it? Because researchers just go into their own corner there, they do their things, and then they go away. How do we get to also see the impact of research in the news? How does the general public get to understand the importance of research? And I think if we can be able to do that, then we can even supersede that 1%, and the plans will enable us to transcend governments and political changes and grow, so that within the fullness of time, within the tens, hundreds of years that we are looking at, we will achieve our objective.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sultan. I would like to hand back over to my colleague, Lucho.
No, thanks so much. I gathered a lot, but amongst the things I gathered, I actually retained 2 of them. The first was, you were speaking by somebody who is very interested in systems thinking. I was thinking of mental models. And it was like, we have to be not whitewashed, but we need deliverance, kind of deliverance. Actually, I remember my father because he doesn't like to hear, I forgot. So he will tell you, before you come to him, you need to go and think for 15 minutes. Go and think before you come. So we really need to spend quite some time thinking. And thanks so much for those great points. So, Jordan, you are not a spectator. And because we went to the same school, you know what to expect.
Yes.
I would like you to think around, everybody talks of equitable partnerships from where you work and from where you sit. And in light of the waning traditional donor support, how must African science institutions rethink their business and funding models? And I will just add, can these partnerships really be equitable? And if yes, what are the criteria for us to judge or to monitor if these partnerships are actually equitable? Thank you.
Thanks. I was just telling Evelyn that maybe I should sit down because Dr. Sultani said we should not be getting external funding. And I'm here on behalf of FCDO. But since Luchuo asked a question, I'll still go ahead and answer it. But I'll start with a challenge first of all, then give 5 very quick and simple points, then wrap up. And the challenge that I'd like to give us is, for all of us where we are seated, is what's the one thing, one, not two, what's the one thing that you will do differently after this conference? The one thing. It doesn't matter whether you're here as a student, as a policymaker, as a researcher, as a funder, what's the one thing that you will do differently after this conference? If you answer that question, I think Rose's job will be done for the 3 days that we spent here. So think about it and please do something about it. Don't just think about it. So there's a gentleman who I think has left and he told the previous speakers that they were being rosy in their picture. And I wanted to start with a very unrosy picture. We know about USAID and you know what happened in terms of like funding, but the UK has also reduced funding. That's also the reality, just in case you did not know. We were at 0.5% of the GNI being used for development, and last month or 2 months ago actually, there was an announcement that it's going to go down to 0.3% of GNI, with that money being moved into defense. So that's 40% cut in the funding that's there. And the things that I want to do in response to your question is just a couple of things that I think we should think about that are around our business model, even as we think about how to respond to this. And one, and these are things that we've also done in the UK internally, is one is we need to very ruthlessly prioritize. If you don't have enough, then you need to think about what are my priorities. I can't overemphasize that enough because you need to think about, as an institution, as a university, as a policymaker, as a country, is what are your priorities. One of the things we keep saying is that the agenda is being set externally. Now that the money is not there and they are not setting the agenda, how are we setting our agenda? Do you know the priorities? Does your country, since we are over 25 countries represented here, have a research agenda, and what are they and how are you applying them in whatever research you're doing? That's number one. Number two, and part of it will involve using available evidence, which is the main theme of this conference, so I won't go into the details of it. Number two is we need to focus on outcomes and impact, and not just the amount of money that has been put into whatever research agenda that we are focusing on. And I think a really good example is something that Dr. Atela, who seated right there, just spoke in the previous session, somewhere in one of the rooms downstairs, about how as they did a study and they were able to find out how much money Treasury is putting into health facilities and into the health system in Kenya, and they challenged them to think about what outcomes come from those health facilities and how do you come up with KPIs that then help you measure and say we put X amount into these facilities, what health outcomes are we getting out of it? Because those two systems don't speak to each other. So think about what outcomes and impact your research is doing. So, and there are many things we could say about that, but that involves a lot of rigorous evaluation into the research that we're doing, and thinking about how can we improve the cost and sustainability of the work that we're doing. The third thing that I will say is something that if you've heard me speak before, you probably have heard say, is to take a systems approach, something that Evelyn, I know, espouses to as well. And this is a challenge specifically to governments seated here, to AUD and APET, to regional bodies, to people operating at that level. And the SFA Foundation, as an example, is we need to take a systems approach. Because you know very well you can have an extremely brilliant scientist or an innovator, but if they're in a system that does not work, then it all comes to naught. You can have a very good institution, but if it's in an environment where research management is bad, where the policies do not support that, then it all comes to naught. So we need people who can stand at the top and take a systems approach and think, how does the research system look like? What are the parts of it? What is working? What is not working? And what do we need to fix? I have an old car, and the other day it had many problems, and one of them was that the seat cover was torn, but it was also jerking in traffic. And I had to make a decision. Do I spend money fixing the seat cover, or do I want to get stuck in the middle of nowhere? So those are parts, that's the ecosystem of my car. And I have to make a decision and say, where do I invest? And then come to the next bit. So think about the research ecosystem and where do you invest? The fourth thing, which has been said over and over again, is collaboration and partnership. There are multiple examples. Science for Africa Foundation that's seated here has a partners group that involves ourselves as FCDO, the Gates Foundation, Mastercard Foundation, Grand Challenges, Welcome, and others. That's an example of how we come together and we put together our minds to be able to address continental challenges. This morning, we were in a meeting with the Kenya Innovation Ecosystem Funders Forum, where we bring together all the innovation ecosystem funders to think about how do we address our problems collectively. Dr. Tony Omwansa, who's the CEO of the Kenya Innovation Agency, was there as a government to think about how do they support this thing. We cannot do these things alone in an ecosystem of just reduced funding. So how do you collaborate as a researcher, as a funder, as government, and other people? Number 5 is adjust your sails to survive. Because the winds have changed. The truth is that the development ecosystem has changed. And there are things that will never go back to what they were before. That is the truth. The sooner you realize that and the sooner you adjust your sails and think about what skills are needed in this new world, the easier it is going to be for you to survive. If we keep on doing business as usual, we will remain in the same place that we were. So think about how to adjust. And then the last thing I'll say, because Luchuo has conveniently stood up there to tell me to stop, is we are here to listen. The solutions are here. You know, if you think about from when USAID announced their funding cuts, a lot of what has been said is what the effect of that will be. But very few people are offering solutions. And that is my challenge to us. What solution are you offering to governments, to researchers, in terms of what should we then do to change our world? So we are here to listen to each other. So be the one that comes up with a solution. Yes, it's true those bad things will happen. As the gentleman said, people will die, yes, but what should we do? So what solution are you bringing to the table? I'll stop here.
Thanks so much, Jordan. And I think from the start of this session, we made a promise that this session would be interactive. And I think from an intellectual humility point of view, us as the organizers, we failed. We failed because we ignored the future of Africa to be on the panel. I am saying that we don't have a youth on this panel. So we are going to do better next time, but we are absolutely going to give an opportunity for a youth in the audience to ask a very important burning question to these amazing panelists in 60 seconds. Is there anybody who wants to take that challenge as a youth? We are trying to make up. Thank you. Maybe one question from an old youth. That's still fine. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I was just willing to share just an experience in Tunisia, my country, where as a young investigator, when I came back there, I have heard of a fund that was created to support research. At that time, it was around 95, no, even before that, 1987, okay? Tunisia created the fund, like every time you go to, a car goes to a station to get her tank filled, its tank filled, then you have a portion of that amount that goes to that fund. That created the first fund for research that was managed, and so that we could go and ask for support there, get research. And then at some point, because of the dialogue of some researchers with policymakers, then we had a law a legal frame where any research needs to be done under the frame of this law. So it was organized by the Minister of Higher Education and Research. So I run a research lab that is supported by some funds and it's competitive, and we have to develop program contracts. And the more funds we collect, the better we are ranked in terms of KPIs. And even because of the crisis now, we have like peanuts, but still it's a good thing that we are organized into that. And there are some programs that are run by the government where we address priorities and things like that. I have identified where is the link missing. So in terms of, okay, we have all this evidence of this research, where do we go from there? But I think that could be an experience that can be replicated or at least used. Because if every liter of gas or fuel you are putting into your car, you put it into a common fund for research, then you get a lot. If you can tax beverages, for instance, things like that. So that's just sharing a little experience.
Thank you very, very much. We're supposed to conclude, and we're 5 minutes into time, but we can't conclude before we give an opportunity to each of our panelists, and I'm going to be very serious, in not more than 1 minute each. The reason we're seated here is to try and come up with solutions to reframe Africa's R&D financing. I would like each one of you in 1 minute or less to just give me a very good one example of how we can find solutions that are scalable and sustainable, local ones that will help us move forward beyond aid. Let's start with you, Dr. Sultani. 1 minute, and I am counting.
I don't know how possible it is, but I'll just say that number one, we cannot do this overnight. So we have to work strategically with our partners to try and see how we gradually move towards getting the bigger proportion of our needs to come from domestic sources. I think that is a very important goal that we need to work on together, and it is possible. It is not something we can do overnight. It is something that might take even hundreds of years, but let's start now. Thank you.
1 minute is 60 seconds, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Counting.
Well, there are so many things to say. One, I think the point that when they were talking, I was thinking about, and I think we need to reimagine African solutions for Africans reflecting African realities. For me, that's very critical. Number two, we should not just fund projects, we should fund institutions. Number three, 60 seconds. Oh, you asked for one. I still have 60 seconds. I'm working with 60 seconds. And maybe the last one, I think for me, urgency is very critical. Urgency in believing, we have a lot of capacity in Africa. And people are not talking so much about urgency, the role of Africans in shaping the direction of where we want to go, the capacity that we have already, the indigenous knowledge, the skills, where do they fit into? I think mobilizing, harnessing that into that direction is one of the solutions that we need to tap into. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Skip you, Jordan, because you gave us a solution, collaboration. You have one. Okay. Please give us the one.
I have one that I wanted to share is for universities, and it points to some work that we're doing. So we're doing some work with universities in the country to help them commercialize, think about developing frameworks and systems to commercialize their research. A lot of Kenyan universities depend on funding from the government to be able to operate. So if we support them to develop systems to commercialize their research and innovations, then they'll generate funding that can help them to be self-sustainable. I think that's one of the things that we've seen progress in, and it's one model that hopefully we can be able to scale up if it works.
Thank you very much. Evelyn?
On Tuesday, after I gave my talk, I was challenged that we need to rethink the title of this conference. We should be talking about from science to politics, because policies is the intermediary that brings us to the policies are what bring us to the politics that would change what we're doing, right? So I want to close with talking about the politics of wastage, because a big part of what's happening on the continent is we have money, we've said that, right?
Yeah.
But most of it is wasted, or a lot of it is wasted. So, and we have evidence, scientific evidence that shows where the wastage is. So already that is low-hanging fruit. If that science and that evidence was shared to help reduce some of the wastage, we already have our innovation fund. So if we can look at the evidence that has demonstrated where the wastage is, that would encourage cross-border sharing so that we're not throwing away vaccines that Zambia need, but we have in our stores here in Kenya. This simple policies that would allow for cross-border sharing would reduce wastage. That's the first one. And we have the minds in this room that would help do that.
Thank you very much. Let's give a hand of applause to our panelists. And from me, I would just like to say that I think we don't need to come back in 2 years with the same songs and singing problems, but that we should convene with solutions in how we can reframe the way we fund, we do, and how we actually impact communities when we work and deliver on science. So enjoy the rest of your evening, and I would like to hand over to our next session. Thank you very much, our panelists. And I guess here we leave. I've seen people take photos, so I guess Dr. Sulutani, before you go, they will need a photo of
Thank you very much. May we give them another round of applause? I'm passionate about financing for Africa, so hence the second hand. At this point, I would like to call Dr. Rose Oroje, if she's in the room. She's the lady who has made sure we eat, we talk, and we find solutions.
Thank you, Maria. Good evening, everyone. I hope, like me, you've had wonderful 3 days of critical conversations, but also getting a sense of the things we need to get doing from tomorrow for the next 2 years, so that we can come here with some actions to report. I won't be very long. I know everyone is very tired and we need to close the conference. And so I just want to mention 2 things before I bring on my colleague Barbara, to take us through a very quick exercise on conference evaluation. IT, could you put up the 2 slides I shared earlier? If they're up, if not, I will continue. I should remember what I shared. But I just wanted to say something about the next steps in terms of what you're expecting to hear from us in the next couple of days. One of them is that what we've been doing most of the day today, the organizers, we've been working on a call to action or something like that that outlines the key things we need to do as we get out of here based on what has come out of the conversations, the presentations, the various keynote addresses. Now that document is not complete because a session has just ended whose actions need to get in that document. And so we are going to finalize it. We have a very good draft, actually. We are going to bring in the content for today, and finalize that and share with you in the next week, hopefully in the next 7 days. I know sometimes you say that and then the conference ends and everybody goes on leave because everybody's very tired. So maybe let me say 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks, we'll share with that document. It will be for you to input, actually, and then we finalize and share the final one. But it will outline actions for various things. IT, you're letting me down. I just wanted to give us some structure of that document. We have cross-cutting action areas, so touching on various issues around strengthening STI, data, evidence, innovations, and centering those in our various development sectors. And then we pick out some specific things because some plenaries and sessions brought up very specific things. So some of them link to, I hope this works. Yeah, there we are. Some of them link to the broader one on harnessing data, innovations, and evidence, but some of them needed to be picked out, and so we'll also pick them out specifically in that document and outline specific actions. So there's integrating STISA 2034 in national and regional development plans. We've had parallel sessions and a plenary on that. There's AI and digital innovations for Africa's development. There's optimizing domestic financing for Africa's development given the context we are in. There's fostering youth innovation and advancing equity and inclusion and increasing investments in STI and RD, and then of course, expanding and deepening STI and EIP. So those are the cross-cutting themes we've picked out, and under each of them we have various actions. And then we structured the conference around those 5 sectors. There were those 5 sectors, but there were also climate change and governance, which were cross-cutting. So we're going to have those sections to bring out the action points that have come from the different parallel sessions. So this document will have those 2 main sessions. We put it up here because I thought you might also have thoughts. If you think we are not capturing it well, you can share with us some suggestions. So that is how the action plan the call to action or action plan, I don't know how to call it, but that's how that document will look like. And then we are very keen for this conference to be owned by a lot more African institutions. And so we are going to put up an online form and invite institutions that are keen to become part of this platform to just fill that form, expressing interest, but also areas where you would want to lead in driving or coordinating action. Like we said, we are not going back to sleep, we are going back to work. And then also to be part of hosting the next conference in the next 2 years. So that form is to invite everyone. And we did that because on the corridors, some people have come to me and said, how come we did not know this conference was coming up? Would have loved to be on board to drive specific conversation. So we'll do that in the next 2 weeks. And Marie, I'm done. So I would like to call on Barbara to come and take us through a quick exercise on evaluating conference, and then we'll have the CEOs come in to give opening remarks. Thank you. Guys, I'm tired. Closing remarks. We can open the 2027 one.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for staying this long. I think this is very impressive that you've been here this long. So that I don't forget, I've been given a task by the interpreters that please don't go away with this. They asked me to specifically hold it and show it to you. So please leave it behind on your seats so that they can take it right after the session. So since we've been talking about science, technology, and innovation, we are going to use an innovative tool to evaluate the conference. It's called Mentimeter, for those of you who've used it before. Anyone who's used Mentimeter in the room? Great, so we have a good pool, okay. So we are, can I please have the projection? So once it comes on the screen, there's going to be a QR code, and then there's also going to be a pin. So you either scan the QR code or you go to www.menti.com. Menti is M-E-N-T-I, menti.com. And once you go there, there's a pin code that you would use. IT? Okay, whilst we wait for IT to get that right, how many of you here made new connections or networks whilst you were here? Because yeah, sometimes some people would come to these meetings, not make new friends, go home and then send emails. But the people are right here, so it's good to connect and just, chat. Informal chats actually work better than emails. So please reach out to the speakers, to the people that you send emails or LinkedIn messages to here. Connect with them. I think that's one of the key things we want to achieve with this conference. Are we winning? Great, thank you. So you can either scan this QR code or you go to www.menti.com. This is anonymous. I'm not going to know who said what. This is to encourage feedback. And we want honest feedback. No one is watching you, so just be free and share with us what your opinions are. So you either scan the QR code or you go to www.menti.com and use the code 26297350. I'll repeat. You go to www.menti.com and you use the code 26297350. And when you're there, just give us a thumbs up so we know those that are online, just to measure how many people are online to enable us to proceed. Maybe in the interest of time, I have to move to question 1. How many of us are connected? Maybe that'll give me, oh, okay, quite a good number. How many of you want me to wait for you? Menti.com. Not connected? Oh, okay. Then please type in your browser menti.com, and then it would request for a code, and then you use 26297350. Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So the first question, in one word, how would you describe your overall experience at the conference? Awesome. Okay. Great. Enriching, educative, eye-opening, and okay. Allowing networking, fantastic. Informative, right. Confused, okay. Timely. Were you just testing the system or you were confused? Yeah, motivating. Okay. So I think we've got some good responses there that you can keep adding on to EPIC. So I'm moving on to the next question. The next question is, what specific things have you liked most about this conference? This is our inaugural event. We are breaking the ice. What is that thing or specific things that you like the most about the conference? Diversity, quality of people, the food, the panel and networking. Okay, diversity of panel members. Okay, I see the diversity is winning. The guest speakers, the networking platforms, the keynotes, diversity of opinion and information. Okay. Right. There are more comments, but they are down there. Can whoever is projecting just go down so we see more comments? Okay. Learning new things. Okay. Interaction with other players, representation from the continent, commercialization. Okay. Allowing free discussions. Okay. Thank you so much for all the great insights. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm just moving to the next question. Was the approach of exploring STI across different priority development sectors effective to you? So we didn't just want to talk about STI broadly. We wanted to look at it from sectors. So we had education panels, we had food security panels. So just looking at it in the various sectors. Did you find that useful with this approach that we considered, or we should have just spoken broadly about STI across different sectors? Okay, so we have a majority finding it useful, a number of people in the maybes, and about a few people also not finding that useful. Okay. So moving on to the next question. Which of the following themes resonated most with you? We had a variety from energy and infrastructure to data and evidence, innovation for wealth, AI, gender and inclusion, youth and education, STI governance, food and nutrition. Okay. Okay. So I'm seeing data and evidence leading the pack, followed by AI. There's youth and education. Then we have interest in innovation and wealth, and then energy. Oh, there's STI governance as well. Gender and inclusion. Okay. So I think the most resonating theme here was data and evidence for policy, which is, yeah, okay, great. Moving on in the interest of time, on a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied were you with the following? Quality of speakers, the relevance of the topics, the session moderation, the time management, as well as the networking opportunities. So you are going to rank for each of the options. So to the left you have strongly disagree, and to the right you have strongly agree on level of satisfaction. Okay, so we have quality of speakers and the relevance of topics in the leads there. We also have networking as a major pool. Yeah, I see time management wasn't. Okay. Great. I'm moving on in the interest of time, since time management is a problem. Rank the following plenary sessions. So this is for day 1 and 2. We had 5 combined for day 1 and 2. One was on integrating STISA into national development agendas. We had science leadership. We also had harnessing AI and digital innovations. We had optimizing domestic financing for development in Africa. And then we had the central place of citizen evidence, which was your, in terms of, if you're going to rank, in terms of your favorites, plenary discussions. This is to help us to know the topics of interest of the audience as we shape future agendas. Okay. Please make sure my panel doesn't come last. Okay. Yeah, I'm bribing you, yeah. Okay, so moving on. I see the highest was AI. Oh, thank you. And then we had domestic financing in the science leadership, the high level panel, and then citizen evidence. Now moving on to day 3, there's also another 5. So the status of innovation in Africa, where did we succeed, where did we fail? Empowering African R&D, beyond COVID-19, looking at genomic surveillance gains, reframing our STI financing, and then I hope I didn't miss a session here. Then there is one, yeah, if Maria impressed you. Okay, so the interest was a lot in the STI financing discussion. Okay. So sorry, I have to move on, but it's collating all your responses in the background and will be tabulated and shared with the conference report. What is your biggest takeaway from the conference? I mean, we had so many discussions, so many topics and initiatives. What is your biggest? I mean, there's so many things you may have learned, but if you want to choose action. Yeah, that's very important. Okay, data is power. Data evidence on policy, act now. Changing Africa's narrative. Stop talking and act. Strong partnerships. Poised. Okay. Domestic financing, implementation, African resources. So I think the core message here is the need for proactiveness and action as the biggest takeaway from this conference, which is a very great message to take home. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following formats enhanced your learning the most? We had keynote sessions, we had parallel sessions, we had the youth panel discussions, we had side event that started, I think yesterday and the day before there were some sessions that started at 7 a.m. So those were the side sessions. And then we also had networking breaks. Which of them enhanced your learning the most? Okay. I'm happy to see there was good networking. Okay. Great. So in the interest of time, moving on, but we see networking and the power sessions were good initiatives. How would you rate the balance between the technical depth and the accessibility across sessions? So here we want to look at the topics that were discussed. Were we sounding too technical? Was it practical? Did you understand what they were talking about? We were trying to see whether we had a good balance, or if it was too simple, or you're not sure what that evaluation will be. Okay, so it looks like a majority believe that it was just right. We had a good balance of the technical depth and accessibility as well. So moving on, did you make at least one meaningful connection that could lead to future collaboration? Okay. I'm looking for that one person. Come, let's connect, please. Okay, so a majority made good connections. I think that's exciting to hear. Moving on. What specific actions will you take as a result of you having participated in this conference? Our key takeaway was action, and it starts with us. What will you do as an individual when you go back home that will support this? I don't want action. I want what are you going to do? What we want the specifics of what we're going to do. Okay, adjust my sales, create a network of collaborative, emphasize the use of evidence, advocacy, proactivity and collaboration. Okay, leveraging the network, empower the youth to lead, capacity building and policy implementation, invent, push for broader intervention of evidence and policies, connect with policymakers, discuss hosting the conference in future, seek meaningful collaboration to enhance data and evidence use, develop STI in countries, follow up on networks created. Okay, great. So moving on to the next one. Please suggest ideas of how we should sustain action and engagement in between now and the next conference. The next conference is 2027. We don't want the momentum to die down. What should we be doing as the partners that organize this conference? So we would love your suggestions on what we should take note of and do. TikTok channel. Okay, webinars and virtual engagements, community of practice, research, proactive engagement, form working groups, regular online webinars. Okay. Engage at all levels, seek political commitment, follow up with the policymakers. Okay, track progress manually, community of practice, keep the app alive for a while. Okay. Have a platform where we can engage. Newsletter, communities of practice. Okay. These are very, very good insights. I think, Rose, you have so much on your plate now. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. What topics or speakers would you like to see featured in next, so this is actually supposed to be next 2 years, EviDev conference? What topics? Maybe there are certain issues we didn't cover this time that you would love to see. Don't worry, 2 more questions and we are done. What topics? Okay, action. Energy transition, green energy, government, ending corruption. Yeah, a good speaker is Michelle Sidibe, that's true. Donald Kaberuka, okay. Evidence in practice, ending corruption. Okay, localizing AI. We did have a localizing AI session, maybe you missed that. We did that with Mozilla. Examples of evidence in AI, minds, okay. Entrepreneurship, influencing politics, okay. These are really great insights. Please keep them coming even as I move to the next question. What other specific things would you like improved in the next conference? So this is not technical. We want logistics, what are the things that we didn't get right that we should be looking at for the next conference to make your sessions enjoyable? Yeah, apart from time. Okay, more youth participants, timekeeping, logistics for travel, food, okay, venue, increase to 5 days. Wow. Wow. Reduce on sessions, okay. Local tourism, okay. Better flight schedules, yeah. All people equal, okay. Maria, don't put people in VIP and leave some of us in the normal. Socialization, okay. I think that I'm moving on to the last question, if I'm not mistaken. Which of these have you already done at the conference? So there are a number of them. I can't read much from here. Okay, asked us a question in a session, exchange contact with someone, took a selfie at the venue. I saw people were very excited about the evidence logo and took selfies. Okay, wow. There's someone that did all of this, okay. Lost track of which room you were supposed to be in, nodded, you dozed off a bit. Okay. Right, so I'm glad to see networking is still very strong. It's one of the main things that we did. So, if there are any questions, please keep them coming whilst I take my seat and hand over to Maria. Thank you very much.
I know that we are tired. Thank you very much, Dr. Barbara. That was very exciting. And I know that we are tired right now. So I'll just keep this short because some of us want to go to Sarit Center to do some shopping before we fly out. But before I call our next set of speakers, someone lost their money yesterday when you were dancing. And I picked it. So if you know you lost money, come to me and you tell me how much you lost. I have it here in my bag. At this point, I'll call Professor Tom Kariuki from the Science for Africa Foundation to come and give his closing remarks. Prof. Karibu.
We are all tired. I saw time management was part of the challenge. But I think they forgot to tell you that we are operating on time zones and they keep on changing, so it probably still is 4 o'clock. So I think one of the things that have come out is what exactly are we going to do in the next 2 years before we go to the next meeting. For us, from the Science for Africa Foundation, we have a commitment to make. When we started with the young ladies who are here performing on day 1, they did ask that question about do something, yeah? It's almost as if they were saying, don't just sit there, do something. maybe they were challenging us to say, don't steal our future, do something. And I think that's a challenge. And I think Jordan from FCD also made this point very, very strongly that there has to be something that is concrete that is going to come out of this meeting. So for us, as a Pan-African funding organization, the one commitment we can make is to say that we are going to work very hard to make an investment moving forward over the next 2 years. Our strategy is to put in $250 million between 2022 and 2027. I think we are 3/4 on that journey, which then means that when we come in 2027, the question we should be asked is, have we actually committed $250 million to go where? To go in 5 areas. One, people, people, people. So we want to train people, we want to provide the researchers and scientists and innovators with the money they need. We want to make sure that we are receiving the best ideas, from ideation through all the discovery, transitioning, implementation policy, and make investments there. People are not just those who are in academia, it is people from wherever the ideas come from. We want to exploit the intellectual ingenuity that we see everywhere. Second area where we want to put money is places of work. Nothing happens without the best conducive places to do the work. Now, traditionally, you may have gone into the history of science, and you might find that there was so-called discovery through luck, serendipity, that big word, Colin. And I don't know, so you have somebody like Albert Einstein and sitting under an apple tree and an apple falling and hitting his head and discovery. I think science doesn't work like that anymore. It works through having the right places, infrastructure, equipment, policies, all of that. So we're going to put more money into that. We have more than 100 institutions in the continent where we have more than 3,000 scientists we are supporting through the support that we have gathered from all over the world. The third area for luck is product. I was very delighted to hear that there was a very good discussion around discovery sciences, transitional sciences, policy implementation. And maybe I'm biased here. I come from the world of discovery sciences, as with Collins and Richard the other day. And so for us, it's the whole value chain of research is important to invest in. Sometimes we delude ourselves when we say, we're doing great work in this area. But if you ask that question about when we do clinical trials in Africa, who holds the IP? Are we just not implementing clinical trials? Are we holding the IP ourselves when it comes to discovery? So we need to ask some hard questions about ourselves, because you can't just say you're doing great in this area and yet you are not looking on the entire value chain. You know, there's a lot of talk about manufacturing. We don't have actually the capacity, the technical capacities to do that. Fill and pack manufacturing is great, but if you really want to do manufacturing for vaccines, for diagnostics, it's a huge investment, and you must have the capacity to do that. That's the third area for work. Products, and we support that. The fourth area is policies, of course. We will continue to work with policymakers where there is leadership development, where there are collaborations need to be built with policymakers, where institutions need to be strengthened, we will support that. And where money needs to be put into that, whatever we can afford to do that, we'll do that. And then partnerships is our fifth area of work. Nothing moves without partnerships. And part of the reason why we are taking, the message we are taking from this meeting is the need for us to continue to expanding, sustaining, and inviting even more partners on this journey that we are taking. Now, money. Somebody sent a pot with a very nice plant. I think it's called what? Money. Huh? That one. That plant. And I think the message, there was a card on it. It said something like, money does not grow on trees. And it was a reminder that although we were negotiating with our partner, it's a reminder that money does not grow on trees. It really takes a lot of canvassing, exploring the entire landscape where you can find financing. The other thing I want to keep reminding ourselves is that, yes, focus on the money that we can get from government. One of the things I have learned working even in government agencies is that Sultani was trying to make that point. Sometimes you spend too much time going to the wrong place. You go thinking that you go to MOH. Yes, that is a very good place to go. Science and technology, that's a very good place to go. But actually, found out the best place to start with is the offices for budget and economic planning. They are the people who plan. They are the people who allocate money. And so what Sultani was saying is very, very, very important. Make a value proposition why you should actually be funded to do the work, because economists think differently from everybody else. I think they go to different schools compared to all of us, whatever that they go through. The last thing I would say, I think geopolitics is changing a lot, but I think it's an opportunity for us to start thinking out of that box of geopolitics. It's a cloud, but there's a silver lining to that cloud. I love my music, and I like even old music. So one of my favorite musicians from, now that will tell you how old I am, but never mind. But Bob Dylan is an American musician. I love him. Why? Because in the 70s and 80s, he was singing some very revolutionary stuff. Did you know that there's only one musician in the world who have won a Nobel Prize? That's the only man who has won the Nobel Prize. And yet there's good music around. The wind, for example, one calls The Wind is Changing, right? Now, the wind is changing. Geopolitics means the wind has changed. And I think we need to grasp on that and make it an opportunity to do that. So please think about the promises we make. Think about 2027. Do what you have to do between now and then, and you'll all be happy to come back together. If I don't make that commitment on behalf of Science for Africa Foundation, all I have to do is to make sure that I am not attending the next meeting.
Thank you very much, Prof. Kariuki, and I will remind you about this commitment, and we have very many witnesses in the room. At this point, I'll invite Dr. Elia Zulu, the Executive Director of the African Institute for Development Policy, to come and say something.
Okay, Maria was you don't give a player a yellow card before they even go on the pitch. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. Really, for me, I'm very excited. We're coming to the end of the meeting. Not only that it was somewhat draining, making sure everything happens, but really just to thank everybody here, thank the people who played a critical role in organizing this. I think when you look at what are we committing to doing from here onwards? I think for me, the word action already came up there from the assessment. But I think for me, when you really look at the call to action that I want to emphasize here, we've talked about evidence for development, right? But I think there's this issue. We talk to policymakers a lot of times. They tell you, we understand the problems. We want to understand more how we move from, even when they have the policies to action, right? So we can talk about, yeah, action from our end, but there's also the issue about emphasizing the role of evidence in informing, in breaking that gap between policy, between ideas and action. And I hope that as we go back, we will focus more on this part of evidence in trying to come up with solutions, not just on paper, but more practically, getting involved with people in government, people in the development community on how to operationalize those actions, because that's where countries that are doing well, what accountability frameworks we need to have there, that are there is what makes the big difference. So I think the other critical issue for us is I think the whole issue about going beyond government. I think for us, maybe as AFIDEP, we focused more on saying promoting evidence use in public policy formulation and implementation. I think what has come out of this meeting that was quite striking was that let's look at development more broadly. Sometimes governments have some, bottlenecks that things may not move. I think I like the session in the morning where we had some private sector voices. Government can facilitate, provide that enabling environment, and how do we push for that? But I think more critically for me, what we need in Africa is some sort of revolution. The young people are saying action. Why do we talk so much and not action? And I think we want a peaceful revolution. Gen Z in Kenya showed that if we don't listen, it can be by force, right? But I think the point is, how do we use evidence to empower a peaceful revolution, to force accountability, to make sure that all these things about corruption, where a lot of money is being lost, but we tend to sit back and so on, how do we put evidence at the center of accountability and forcing the revolution, that so the Gen Zs, when they're empowered with that evidence, even maybe not throwing out governments by force, but by mobilizing themselves to really choose leaders who are going to make the real difference. I think for me, that's one thing that I can say is critical. In terms of specific commitments, I think there's an issue at home. That was a big commitment about, what was it, say $250 million? I think the issue about more money, that's very, very commendable. More money into research and so on, but we need more money for development as well. This has been very, very critical. How do we use evidence to make the investment case? But what was also clear here is that just having more money is not enough. How do we use our evidence to propel efficiency? And I think if we focus on that and try to come up with frameworks, because everybody is talking in the health session here, there's a lot of talk about, there are a lot of wastage, there's a lot of this. How do you define efficiency? How do you define good spending from an evidence angle? And how do you set up accountability systems, evidence-based, in the M&D systems that governments have to make sure that we are measuring performance, because that's the improving efficiency, placing evidence as a central tool in improving efficiency will mainly depend on what is happening at implementation. And we don't, I think as researchers, we don't use these institutional administrative data enough to assess how program implementation is happening. And I hope that between now and the next years, at least from our end, we'll try to see how we can help close that gap so that we can come with more sort of solid examples looking at this. And finally, I think it's, for me, if AV for Dev has to happen, universities have to play a big role. The capacities have to be built in universities. The universities need to take their think tank role quite seriously. So I think we talked about incentives for professors who are engaging in policy. And now also the issue about building capacities of people in universities on how to engage with policies. I think this is another area where we can have specific programs, get universities to participate, and see at the end of 2 years how far we've gone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elia. At this point, I'll call Prof. Brando Okolo, the Senior Advisor for Science, Technology and Innovation at the African Union Development Agency, AUD and APET. Thank you.
Well, I guarantee you I'm going to take less time than the last speakers. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for taking out time from your busy schedules to be here, to listen to us, get a sense of what STISA 2034 means. It's a document that's been formulated for Africans, so you should take full ownership of it. When we worked on the implementation plan of that document, the goal was to make it an investment plan, and that's what it is. So I want you to start seeing science, technology, and innovation, all the activities around it as an investment action. Together with the organizing partners, I would like to thank you. As you go back, think about all the things that you've learned here. If there's anything you can act on, feel free to act on it. If you need our support, call on us. We're your servants. That's what the African Union does. African Union members, the colleagues here, we're there for you as members of a big union within this continent. Without further ado, I'll leave the last words to Honorable Aziz Kamara, the Deputy Minister for Technical Education in Sierra Leone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if it's my luck to be the last politician in the room, but I think I must thank you all for having stayed through the sessions. I'm honored to have this opportunity to make a closing remarks, and I do so with great humility, and I'm really pleased, to see the hope for Africa. We acknowledge, I think we're gathered here because we acknowledge our collective responsibility to make Africa what we wanted, taking Africa forward. I mean, we're gathered here as major stakeholders. I think we drive from the front, trying to build Africa. As policymakers, as researchers, as practitioners, I think we have what it takes to move Africa forward. We have had 3 days of effective engagement on the role of science, technology, and innovation to achieve SDG 2030, Agenda 2063, and then to think about how we move STISA 2034 forward. We gathered mainly, the theme is clear. I think when we're all coming here, we're wondering, how we're going to put all of this together, with the active commitment of the AU-NEPAD team, Science for Africa, and AFIDEP. And we see the results, the wonderful engagements, the commitments, the high-level panels, the side events, the parallel sessions. I was confused as to what session to get into, because every session has so much value. And coming from Sierra Leone, I think we commend these efforts because we have invested on human capital development. Our president came into power in 2018, and he saw human capital development as the major driver of sustainable development, and we continue to invest in that. The efforts we commit to here today is really how we protect these investments, our collective efforts, how we protect it. If we talk of industrialization, we talk of developing the middle-level manpower of Africa, we talk of the demographics of Africa, how it's rising, the upward trajectory, and the opportunities that we need to create. We know that we cannot do so if we don't invest and make efforts, on science. We talk of STEM education. If we have to do that in school, we must engage as researchers or at higher education institutions to see how research speaks directly to national development and how we make these documents, be it 2030, be it Agenda 2063, be it STISA 2034, be it the policies that we have put in place in our countries, on national science, technology, and innovation, how we move it forward. So I think we have to reflect on that more closely. We have achieved, I believe, more than we expected, during the 3 days. I can tell from the time that we have spent together, long sessions, having to party together, the networking events. It was very clear when Barbara, was doing the Mentimeter. I think the things that we must reflect on, and we should reflect on them with action that we must take in our little corners when we go back. Accountability. We must all be accountable. I know you try to hold us to account as politicians, as people who lead in policy, but we must all be accountable. We must take an active interest when policies are developed beyond just the approval of policy through cabinet or through ministries, departments, and agencies, but to identify clearly what we need to do to push it forward. Political will. When we speak of political will, it goes beyond just the manifesto translating into national development plans. it goes into us paying attention, what's the budgetary allocation? Not just appropriation, but disbursements as well. I think Professor was talking here about knowing the right person to engage. If it means you have to engage the Minister of Finance, the Financial Secretary, or the Director of Budget, you must do so. It is political commitment and delivery that will lead us to self-reliant. The reason why we pay attention to Trump, his stupidity and foolishness in cutting funds on critical projects, is because we have not been adequately self-sufficient and self-reliant. I think that's something we must pay attention to. Innovative financing and sustainability, I think enough has been said about that, how we look downwards to see we're creative at local level. We bring on board local stakeholders. We cannot just be speaking from the top, in our capital cities, in urban centers, and not go down to the chiefs, to the local women, to the young people, who are the beneficiaries, or if things go wrong, who will have the heaviest hit. So I think that we must take note of. Collaboration and partnership. I think we must be intentional about it. It must go beyond our proposals. It must be demonstrated in actions that we collaborate, we partner, and we support. Public-private partnership. I know in our setting, the first thing you think, like, I don't have the money in government. Let me go to private and to see their commitment as a corporate social responsibility. But we must think beyond that and think of mutual benefit, how they benefit. If it's a private, if it's an industry or an SME, are they benefiting from research? Are they benefiting from the output from universities? The manpower that you give them, do they come with the right skill sets and research? I think we must pay attention to that, beyond just corporate social responsibilities. If we want to have the Africa we want, I think more importantly, we must take ownership of the process to move it forward. That's the Africa that we can create together. Science diplomacy, we've spoken enough about science diplomacy, how we do this in an aggressive way so that we produce results. It's not so much the process, but it's the outcome that we produce, and to be self-reliant. Clearly from our deliberation, I don't know for you, but I feel a sense of urgency amongst us all. When we go back in our travels, when we go back, I think there should be that sense of urgency to transform our high panel discussions, our parallel sessions, our side engagements, our networking into action. Let's do more with less. There are times we give up because the resources are not available. We give up on the plan, we give up on our action, we give up on our ability to move things. I think we must transcend beyond that. Let's harness our zeal to succeed together. I think that's the only way we can create the Africa that we want. Thank you very much, and may God bless us all.
Thank you very much, Honorable, and thank you, Prof. Brando. I think protocol dictates that the Honorable is supposed to declare the conference closed. So I don't want to take over the position now.
This is gender balance at play, or equity. The conference was opened by the Honorable Minister from Malawi, Dr. Jesse. So I think she'll be pleased that I close. By the way, I said I'm a feminist myself. I have 2 girls, so I'm a minority in my household. So on that note, I declare this conference closed. Thank you.